The Great Hall of the Galactic Council stretched before Ambassador Juan like a vast metal cathedral. Hundreds of alien species filled the curved seating areas, their various forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that would have amazed any human seeing it for the first time. But Juan had seen this sight many times before, and today it filled him with sadness rather than wonder. He walked slowly to the center speaking platform, his simple black diplomatic suit a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and armor worn by the other representatives. Behind him, his aide Nari followed quietly, carrying a small data pad that contained humanity's final message to the galaxy. The Vorthak delegation sat in the prime seating area, their massive forms draped in red. War banners. War Commander Thexvol dominated their section, his forearms crossed over his armored chest, his 6 eyes fixed on Juan with obvious contempt. The Vorthak had conquered 17 star systems in just 10 years, and they were proud of their reputation as the galaxy's finest warriors. "The human speaks again," Thexvol said loudly, his voice carrying across the hall without need for amplification. Several species laughed, a sound like breaking glass mixed with grinding metal. "Tell us, little ambassador, what complaints does your infant species bring today?" Juan reached the speaking platform and turned to face the assembly. He had practiced this speech for weeks, but now that the moment had arrived, the words felt heavy in his mouth. This would be the last time he spoke to this council as Earth's representative. "Honored delegates," Juan began, his voice steady despite the weight of what he was about to say. "I stand before you today not to complain, but to deliver a final warning." The hall erupted in jeers and laughter. The Vorthak delegation made loud clicking sounds with their mandibles, their way of showing amusement. Other species joined in with their own sounds of mockery. Quindar, the tall, thin mediator from the neutral ascendancy, raised one of his 6 arms for silence. His species had run the Galactic Council for over 1,000 years, and his word carried weight. "Let the human speak," he said in his whistling voice. "All species deserve to be heard." Juan nodded his thanks to Quindar and continued. "For the past 5 years, Earth has requested a simple buffer zone around our territory. 50 light years of empty space between our borders and any military expansion by other powers. We have asked politely, we have offered trade agreements, we have tried diplomacy, and we have ignored you," Thexvol interrupted, rising to his full 8-foot height. "Because your requests are foolish. Why should the mighty Vorthak Empire be limited by the fears of a species that has barely learned to travel between stars?" Many, in the assembly, nodded in agreement. Humanity had only joined the galactic community 30 years ago, making them practically infants compared to civilizations that were millions of years old. Their technology seemed primitive, their military small, their influence minimal. Nari stepped forward and handed Juan the datapad. He looked down at it for a moment, then back up at the assembly. "War Commander Thexvol, your expansion fleet is currently positioned 48 light years from Earth's border. In 3 days, if you continue your current course, you will cross into the space we have clearly marked as off-limits." "And what will you do about it?" Thexvol asked, spreading all 4 of his arms wide. "Send your tiny fleet to stop us? We have counted your ships, human. 200 vessels at most. My 7th fleet alone has 200 ships, each one larger and more powerful than anything in your pathetic navy." The Vorthak delegation cheered at their commander's words. Other species murmured in agreement. It was true that humanity's fleet seemed small and outdated compared to the massive warships that other civilizations could field. Juan looked directly at Thexvol, his expression calm, but serious. "War Commander, I am not here to threaten you. I am here to warn you. There is a difference." "Explain this difference," Quindar said, his large eyes focused intently on the human ambassador. "A threat is what you make when you want someone to be afraid," Juan replied. "A warning is what you give someone to keep them safe. We do not want to hurt anyone, we simply want to be left alone in our small corner of the galaxy." "Then you should have chosen a different corner," Thexvol said with a sound that might have been laughter. "The space around your Earth contains 3 systems with valuable mining worlds. The Vorthak Empire needs those resources. Your borders mean nothing to us. The hall filled with murmurs of agreement. Many species had expanded their territories by claiming resources from weaker neighbors. It was considered a normal part of galactic politics. Juan sighed and looked down at his datapad one final time. When he looked back up, his expression had changed. There was something in his eyes that made several nearby delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. War Commander Thexvol, Juan said slowly, you have been warned. Every species in this hall has been warned. We have marked our borders clearly with warning buoys in 17 languages. We have sent diplomatic messages to every government. We have explained our position in trade meetings, cultural exchanges, and military briefings. He paused and looked around the great hall, making eye contact with as many delegates as possible. We asked for 50 light years of empty space around our home, not because we are afraid, not because we are weak, but because we know what will happen if you cross those borders. And what exactly will happen? Thexvol demanded, his voice, now carrying a slight edge of irritation. Juan's next words were spoken quietly, but in the vast hall they carried to every corner with perfect clarity. You will die. All of you. Every ship, every crew member, every Vorthak who crosses our borders will cease to exist. This is not a threat, War Commander. This is a promise. The hall fell completely silent. Even the constant background hum of the life support systems seemed to pause. Hundreds of alien eyes stared at the small human standing alone on the speaking platform. Then Thexvol began to laugh. It started as a low rumble in his massive chest and grew into a roaring sound that echoed off the walls. Soon, half the assembly was laughing with him. The human thinks he can frighten the Vorthak Empire, Thexvol said between fits of laughter. This primitive species believes they can destroy our fleets with their tiny ships and ancient weapons. Juan waited patiently for the laughter to die down. When it did, he spoke one final time. War Commander, you have 3 days to change course. After that, we will consider any Vorthak ship within 50 light years of Earth to be an act of war. We will respond accordingly. He turned and began walking toward the exit, Nari following close behind. As they reached the great doors, Quindar called out to him. Ambassador Juan, the Council will vote on this matter. We may decide to support Vorthak expansion in the interest of galactic stability. Juan paused at the threshold and looked back, one final time. Mediator Quindar, that is your choice to make. But understand this. We have told you exactly what will happen. When it does, remember that you were warned. With that, the human delegation left the great hall. Behind them, the laughter resumed, even louder than before. The vote was unanimous. The Vorthak Empire would be allowed to continue their expansion. The human borders would not be recognized. 3 days later, War Commander Thexvol gave the order for his fleet to advance. War Commander Thexvol stood on the bridge of his flagship, the blood of conquest, watching the stars shift as his fleet moved through space. 200 of the Vorthak Empire's finest warships surrounded him, each one a testament to their superior military technology. The bridge crew worked quietly at their stations, their forearms moving with practiced efficiency across the control panels. Fleet status report, Thexvol commanded, his 6 eyes focused on the main display screen. All ships reporting ready, War Commander, replied his tactical officer, Dexmar. We will reach the human border zone in 6 hours. Long-range sensors show no sign of enemy activity. Thexvol made a pleased clicking sound with his mandibles. The humans had been bluffing, just as he expected. Their so-called borders were unmarked space, and their threats were nothing but empty words meant to frighten species stronger than themselves. Sir, the communications officer called from her station. We are receiving a transmission from a human vessel. Put it on screen, Thexvol ordered. The display flickered and showed the bridge of a small human ship. A man in a simple blue uniform sat in the captain's chair, his expression serious but calm. Behind him, other humans worked at their stations with the same quiet efficiency that Thexvol saw in his own crew. I am Captain Minho of the Earth Defense Ship Soul's Pride, the human said. War Commander Thexvol, you are approaching territory that Earth has declared off limits to all military vessels. I am authorized to offer you one final opportunity to withdraw your fleet. Thexvol laughed. the sound booming across his bridge. Captain Minho, I am impressed by your courage in facing my fleet with such a small ship. How many crew members do you have? 50? 100? 123, Captain Minho replied without hesitation. War Commander, I urge you to reconsider. Turn your fleet around and return to Vorthak space. There is still time to avoid what comes next. And what exactly comes next, Captain? Thexval asked, moving closer to the screen. Will you ram your single ship into my fleet? Will you fire your primitive weapons at my shields? Captain Minho was quiet for a moment, and Thexval noticed something strange in the human's eyes. It was not fear as he expected, but something that looked almost like sadness. War Commander, 3 months ago, Ambassador Juan warned your government about crossing our borders. 2 weeks ago, we sent additional warnings to your fleet commanders. Yesterday, we transmitted final warnings on all emergency frequencies. You have ignored every attempt we have made to prevent this conflict. Because your warnings are meaningless, Thexval said, his voice growing louder. The Vorthak Empire does not bow to the threats of inferior species. They were not threats, Captain Minho said quietly. They were warnings. There is a difference. Something in the human's tone made Thexval pause. It was the same calm certainty that Ambassador Juan had shown in the council chambers. For a moment, the war commander felt a tiny flicker of doubt, but he quickly pushed it away. Communications Officer Yuna, Captain Minho said, turning to a young woman at one of the bridge stations. Transmit the final authorization code. The woman nodded and began typing rapidly at her console. Code transmitted, Captain. All stations are acknowledging receipt. Captain Minho turned back to face Thexval on the screen. War Commander, you now have exactly 60 seconds to begin turning your fleet around. After that, we will consider your presence in this space to be an act of war against Earth. 60 seconds? Thexval roared, his anger finally overcoming his amusement. You dare to give ultimatums to the Vorthak Empire? Dexmar, target their ship. Prepare to fire. Weapons locked on target, War Commander, Dexmar reported. Captain Minho's expression did not change. War Commander, you are making a mistake. Please reconsider. The only mistake was allowing your species to join the galactic community. Thexval snarled. Dexmar, fire all weapons. Destroy that ship. The blood of conquest unleashed its full arsenal on the small human vessel. Plasma beams and particle cannons lit up the darkness of space as they struck the Soul's Pride. The ship's shields flared briefly, then collapsed under the overwhelming firepower. Secondary explosions rippled across the hull as the vessel broke. Apart. Target destroyed, War Commander, Dexmar reported with satisfaction. Thexval watched the debris field expand, feeling pleased with the demonstration. The destruction of the human ship would be broadcast across the galaxy, showing everyone what happened to species that dared to challenge Vorthak superiority. Sir? The communications officer called urgently. I am picking up a transmission from the debris field. Impossible, Thexval said. That ship was completely destroyed. The signal is very weak, but it appears to be coming from an emergency beacon, the officer reported. It is transmitting a coded message on a frequency I have never seen before. Thexval moved to the communication station and looked at the display. Strange symbols scrolled across the screen, unlike any language in the galactic database. The message repeated over and over for nearly a minute, then suddenly stopped. What did it say? Thexval demanded. Unknown, War Commander. The code is not in our translation systems. It may have been some kind of death message or religious prayer. Thexval dismissed the mystery with a wave of one of his arms. Humans were a young species with many primitive customs. The message was probably just the last words of a dying crew. Resume course to Earth, he ordered. Maximum speed. I want to reach their home system before they can organize any further resistance. The fleet accelerated through space, leaving the debris field of the Soul's Pride far behind. What Thexval did not know was that the coded message had not been a death prayer or final words. It had been 7 simple words transmitted in an Old Earth language called Korean. Protocol 7 is authorized. The die is cast. Across human space, devices that had waited in the cold darkness for decades began to wake up. Hidden sensors recorded the destruction of Captain Minho's ship and the continuing advance of the Vorthak fleet. Deep in the asteroid belts of distant systems, automated mining stations received new orders and began working with increased urgency. On the outer edges of the solar system, objects that looked like ordinary space debris suddenly came alive with activity. The message reached Earth 7 hours later, where it was received by a woman named Nari in a secret facility buried deep beneath the planet's surface. She looked at the decoded words on her screen for a long moment, then reached for a red phone that had never been used in 30 years of human spaceflight. "This is Control," she said when the phone was answered. "Protocol 7 is now active." "Repeat, Protocol 7 is now active." "Understood, Control. All stations are standing by." Nari hung up the phone and turned to her console. Across the galaxy, systems that had been built in secret and tested in darkness were powering up for their first and only use. The Vorthak fleet continued toward Earth, unaware that their destruction of one small ship had just triggered the most sophisticated defense network ever created. War Commander Thexval stood on his bridge, pleased with his easy victory and looking forward to the conquest of Earth. He had no idea that Captain Minho's sacrifice had just doomed every ship in his fleet. The humans had kept their promise. They had warned him exactly what would happen if he crossed their borders. Now it was time for the consequences. Admiral Seok stood on the bridge of the EDS Incheon, watching the approaching Vorthak fleet on his tactical display. 47 human ships were arranged in a defensive formation around him, each one appearing to bristle with weapons and determination. To any outside observer, it looked like humanity's desperate last stand. "Admiral," his tactical officer Hyun reported from her station. "Vorthak fleet is now within weapons range. Count confirmed at 200 ships, exactly as intelligence predicted." "Very good," Admiral Seok said calmly. "Signal all ships to begin the performance. Make it look convincing." Hyun smiled slightly as she relayed the orders. The human fleet began to move into what appeared to be a standard defensive pattern. Their formations tight and disciplined. What the Vorthak could not detect was that every single ship was completely empty, except for advanced AI systems and remote control equipment. On a hidden station 3 light-years away, Engineer Jin monitored the readings from his control center. Banks of computers surrounded him, each one connected to devices that had been secretly placed throughout the galaxy over the past 50 years. His screens showed energy readings, gravitational measurements, and quantum field fluctuations that would have been impossible to detect with normal instruments. "All systems showing green," Jin reported into his headset. "The mice are walking into the trap." Back on the Incheon, Admiral Seok opened communications with the Vorthak flagship. War Commander Thexval's image appeared on the main screen, his 6 eyes gleaming with anticipated victory. "Admiral Seok," Thexval said, "I'm impressed that you chose to face us in battle rather than surrender immediately. Your courage is admirable, even if it is foolish." "War Commander," Admiral Seok replied, "you were warned to stay away from our territory. This battle could still be avoided if you withdraw your fleet now." Thexval's laughter echoed across both bridges. "Admiral, you have 47 ships, I have 200. Your weapons are primitive compared to ours, your armor is thin, and your shields are weak. Why do you persist in this fiction, that you can defeat the Vorthak Empire?" "Perhaps because we know something you do not," Admiral Seok said quietly. "The only thing you know is how to die bravely," Thexval replied. "All ships attack formation. Show these humans what real military power looks like." The Vorthak fleet spread out into their battle formation, a sight that had terrified dozens of alien species across the galaxy. Their ships were massive and powerful, each one capable of destroying a planet's surface defenses single-handedly. Plasma cannons and particle beams charged to full power as they prepared to sweep the human fleet from space. Admiral Seok watched the enemy formation with professional interest. Everything was going exactly according to plan. All ships begin evasive maneuvers, make them work for every kill. The battle began with a brilliant display of firepower from both sides. Human ships darted between the larger Vorthak vessels, their smaller size allowing them to avoid the heaviest weapons while they returned fire with their own guns. To any observer, it looked like a desperate fight between a small defensive force and an overwhelming invasion fleet. But Engineer Jin, watching from his hidden station, could see the truth. Every human ship movement was calculated to draw the raw Vorthak fleet deeper into a specific region of space. Every apparent retreat was actually a carefully planned withdrawal, designed to position the enemy exactly where they needed to be. First phase complete, Jin reported. Enemy fleet is now within the primary containment zone. Admiral Siak received the message and allowed himself a small smile. On his tactical display, he could see the Vorthak ships spreading out to surround his retreating forces. They had taken the bait perfectly. Admiral, Tactical Officer Hyon said, playing her part perfectly. We have lost 8 ships. Hull integrity on the Busan is at 30%. Request permission to begin general retreat. Granted, Admiral. Siok replied loudly enough for the Vorthak communications officers to hear. All ships fall back to the secondary defense line. The human fleet began what appeared to be a panicked retreat toward Earth. Several ships released life pods and debris, making their damage look convincing. The Vorthak fleet pursued eagerly, sensing victory within their grasp. War Commander Thexavol watched the running battle with satisfaction. The humans were fighting better than he had expected, but the outcome was never in doubt. His ships had destroyed nearly 20 human vessels, while losing only 3 of their own to lucky shots. Tactical Officer Dexmar, Thexval ordered, signal the fleet to increase speed. I want to catch their remaining ships before they can reach Earth's orbit. Yes, War Commander. Fleet acceleration increasing to maximum. What neither Dexmar nor Thexval realized was that their pursuit was leading them through a carefully mapped route. Every asteroid field, every gas cloud, every seemingly random piece of space debris had been cataloged and prepared years in advance. The human retreat was drawing them into a 3-dimensional maze that stretched across multiple star systems. Engineer Jin's screens showed the Vorthak fleet's position relative to the hidden devices scattered throughout the region. For decades, human ships had been quietly placing small, undetectable objects throughout this area of space. They looked like natural debris or failed experiments, but each one contained technology that no other species had ever seen. Second phase complete, Jin reported. Enemy fleet is now within optimal range of all primary systems. Admiral Siak nodded and opened a secure channel to Earth Command. Control, this is Admiral Siak. The Vorthak fleet is in position. Request authorization to proceed to Phase 3. The response came immediately from Nari's voice. Authorization granted, Admiral. Execute Phase 3 on your discretion. Admiral Siak turned to his crew, all of whom were actually on Earth controlling their ships remotely. The bridge around him was just an elaborate simulation designed to fool any Vorthak spies who might be monitoring human communications. Ladies and gentlemen, Admiral Siak said calmly, it has been an honor serving with you in this charade. Tactical Officer Hyun, signal our remaining drones to begin final maneuvers. Engineer Jin, prepare to activate the defense grid. Aye, sir. Both officers replied simultaneously. On his screens, Engineer Jin watched as the last few human ships led the Vorthak fleet into the center of the trap. The enemy vessels were now surrounded by thousands of hidden devices, each one waiting for his signal to activate. War Commander Thexval stood on his bridge, confident that victory was only minutes away. The last dozen human ships were limping toward Earth, their shields failing and their weapons nearly exhausted. Soon, he would be able to broadcast the conquest of humanity to the entire galaxy. He had no idea that he and his entire fleet were about to become the first test subjects for humanity's true defensive system. The warnings had been clear, the consequences had been explained, and now it was time for the Vorthak Empire to learn what happened when a species that had spent centuries preparing for war finally decided to stop being polite. All stations report. Ready, Jin announced to Admiral Siak. The trap is set. Then spring it, Admiral Siak ordered. Let them see what humans do to uninvited guests. The space around the Vorthak fleet suddenly erupted into chaos. What had been empty vacuum moments before now writhed with impossible energies. Artificial gravity wells appeared from nowhere, twisting space itself into knots that made the massive Vorthak warships tumble helplessly. Dark matter streams, invisible to normal sensors, began tearing at their hulls like cosmic razors. War Commander Thexvol gripped the command rail of his bridge as the blood of conquest shook violently. Alarms screamed throughout the ship while his crew struggled to understand what was happening to them. "Report!" Thexvol roared over the noise. "Unknown, War Commander," Tactical Officer Dexmar shouted back, his forearms flying across his control panels. "Sensors are detecting massive gravitational distortions throughout the fleet formation. Energy readings are beyond our instrument range." "How is this possible?" Thexvol demanded. There were no human ships in this area, no weapons platforms, nothing. Before anyone could answer, a calm human voice filled the bridge, broadcasting on all frequencies. It belonged to Fleet Commander Jiwan, speaking from a location the Vorthak could not trace. "War Commander Thexvol," the voice said with cold politeness, "you were warned. 3 months ago, Ambassador Huan told your government exactly what would happen if you crossed Earth's borders. 2 weeks ago, we sent additional warnings to your fleet commanders. 6 hours ago, Captain Minho offered you one final chance to withdraw." Thexvol activated his communication system, trying to respond, but his transmission was blocked by some kind of interference he had never encountered before. Commander Jiwan continued speaking as if she could hear his thoughts. "You cannot reply, War Commander, because we are not having a conversation. We are delivering the consequences we promised." Around the Vorthak fleet, space itself seemed to come alive. Objects that had appeared to be random asteroids suddenly unfolded into complex, geometric shapes, revealing themselves as camouflaged weapons platforms. Gas clouds that had looked natural began pulsing with internal energy, showing they were actually controlled plasma formations. "Did you think," Commander Jiwan asked, "that a species which reached the stars would leave its home defenseless? Did you believe we would trust our survival to the goodwill of strangers?" On his hidden monitoring station, Engineer Jin watched his instruments with professional satisfaction. Every system was performing exactly as designed. The gravitational manipulators were functioning at 98% efficiency. The dark matter containment fields were stable. The quantum disruption generators were operating within acceptable parameters. "Phase 4 activation complete," Jin reported to Admiral Siak. "All Vorthak vessels are now contained within the primary kill zone. No escape routes available." Scientist Kang's voice joined the broadcast from her laboratory deep beneath Earth's surface. Her tone was calm and educational, as if she were giving a lecture to students rather than explaining the destruction of an invasion fleet. "War Commander, you are currently experiencing the effects of humanity's stellar defense network. We have spent 300 years developing this system. Every asteroid in this region has been hollowed out and equipped with gravitational manipulation technology. Every gas cloud has been seeded with plasma control devices. Even the space between stars has been filled with quantum field generators. The Vorthak fleet tried desperately to escape, but their ships moved like insects trapped in amber. The artificial gravity wells held them in place while more exotic weapons began to take effect. Some vessels simply vanished as their molecular bonds were disrupted. Others were crushed by gravitational forces that compressed their hulls into balls of metal. "This is impossible," Thexvol whispered, watching his mighty fleet being destroyed by weapons that seemed to bend the laws of physics. "No species has technology like this. The Galactic Council would have detected it." As if responding to his thoughts, Scientist Kang continued her explanation. "The beauty of our system, War Commander, is that it uses no conventional technology. We did not build weapons platforms or deploy fleets. Instead, we learned to weaponize the fundamental forces of reality itself." Commander Jiwan's voice took over again. "For 3 centuries, human scientists have studied gravity, quantum mechanics, and dark matter, not to build better starships or faster computers, but to answer one simple question: how do we protect our home from species like yours?" The blood of conquest groaned as impossible forces pressed against its hull from every direction. Thexvol could see his other ships suffering the same fate. The proud 7th Fleet, which had conquered 17 star systems, was being methodically destroyed by weapons they could not see or understand. "You mocked our small fleet," Commander Jiwan said. You laughed at our primitive technology, but you failed to ask the right question. If humans are as weak as they appear, why did they feel confident enough to mark borders and make ultimatums? Engineer Jin's readings showed the Vorthak ship's structural integrity dropping rapidly. Most were already beyond the point where their crews could survive, but the weapon systems continued their work with mechanical precision. The answer, Scientist Kang said, is that we were never weak. We simply chose to hide our strength until we needed it. Every human colony, every trade ship, every diplomatic mission has been part of a vast intelligence network. We have spent decades learning about every species in the galaxy, identifying potential threats and preparing appropriate responses. Thexval tried one last time to send a surrender signal, but his communications were still blocked. Around him, his bridge crew worked frantically at their stations, trying to find some way to escape the trap that had closed around them. Surrender is not an option, War Commander, Commander G1 said, somehow knowing what he was attempting. You were given every opportunity to avoid this outcome. Ambassador Huan's words in the council chambers were not a negotiation. They were a statement of fact. The artificial gravity wells began to intensify, and Thexval felt the deck plates beneath his feet start to buckle. His proud flagship, which had led the conquest of entire civilizations, was being torn apart by forces beyond his understanding. You desert asked what would happen if you crossed our borders, Commander G1 continued. We told you exactly you would die. All of you. Every ship, every crew member, every Vorthak who entered our space would cease to exist. Scientist Kang added her final words to the broadcast. This demonstration is being recorded by observation probes from 47 different species. The footage will be transmitted throughout the galaxy within hours. Let it serve as a reminder that humanity's warnings are not suggestions. Engineer Jin watched his instruments as the last Vorthak ship succumbed to the gravitational forces. Where the mighty 7th Fleet had been, only empty space remained. 200 of the galaxy's most advanced warships had been reduced to their constituent atoms in less than an hour. All targets neutralized, Jin reported calmly. Defense grid returning to standby mode. Commander G1's final words echoed across the emptiness where the Vorthak fleet had been. The borders of Earth remain at 50 light-years. Any military vessel crossing that line will receive the same treatment. This concludes our demonstration. Their quantum fields collapsed. The gravity wells disappeared and space returned to normal. But across the galaxy, the message was already spreading. Humanity had kept its promise, and the price of ignoring their warnings was complete annihilation. President Day stood in the communications center deep beneath Earth's capital, preparing to address the Galactic Council for the first time since the destruction of the Vorthak 7th Fleet. Around her, dozens of technicians worked quietly at their stations, monitoring reactions from across the galaxy as news of the battle spread. The Great Council chamber appeared on her screen, but it was very different from the last time a human had spoken there. Where before there had been laughter and mockery, now there was only stunned silence. Hundreds of alien representatives sat motionless in their seats, their various forms tense with fear and uncertainty. Mediator Quindar looked older than his 1,000 years as he activated the communication link. President Day, he said, his whistling voice barely steady. The Galactic Council recognizes Earth's right to speak. Thank you, Mediator, President Day replied, her tone polite but cold. I will be brief. 3 days ago, the Vorthak 7th Fleet crossed into space that Earth had clearly marked as off-limits to military vessels. As promised, their fleet has been neutralized. The silence in the Great Hall was absolute. Not a single delegate moved or spoke. President Day continued. The Vorthak Empire's colonies and homeworld remain untouched. We have no interest in conquest or expansion. We simply wanted to be left alone in our small corner of the galaxy. When that request was ignored, we responded exactly as we said we would. On her own monitoring station, communications specialist, Yoon tracked the real-time reactions from across the galaxy. Every major civilization was intercepting and analyzing the broadcast. Intelligence networks that had dismissed humanity as primitive were frantically updating their threat assessments. The footage of this engagement has been transmitted to every government in the galactic community, President Day said. We want there to be no misunderstanding about what happened or why it happened. The Vorthak fleet was not destroyed in battle. It was eliminated by a defense system that has existed around Earth for over a century. She paused, letting her words sink in across the chamber. In their seats, delegates who had once viewed humans as ignorant newcomers now struggled to understand how they had so completely misjudged humanity's capabilities. We repeat our previous message, President Day continued. Earth's borders extend 50 light-years in all directions from our home system. These borders are not suggestions. They are not open to negotiation. Any military vessel crossing that boundary will be treated as an act of war. War Commander Thexvol's second-in-command, Subcommander Vextar, spoke from the Vorthak delegation's seats. His voice shook as he asked, President Day, what of our crews? What of War Commander Thexvol? President Day's expression did not change. Sub-Commander, your crews received the same warnings that your government received. They chose to ignore those warnings. There were no survivors. The simple finality of her words sent a shiver through the assembled delegates. 200 ships and their crews gone without a trace, eliminated by weapons that had been invisible until the moment they struck. How long? Mediator Quindar asked quietly. How long have you possessed these capabilities? Since before we made contact with galactic civilization, President Day replied. When humanity first detected radio signals from other star systems, we made a decision. We would join the galactic community and attempt peaceful coexistence. But we would also prepare for the possibility that diplomacy might fail. Communications specialist Yoon smiled as she read her incoming reports. Trade requests were flooding in from species that had previously ignored Earth's commerce proposals. Border disputes with human space had ceased entirely. 3 different civilizations had sent formal apologies for past misunderstandings. President Day called out the delegate from the hegemony of worlds. Surely the Galactic Council deserves some explanation of these weapons. How can we maintain peace when one species possesses such overwhelming power? Delegate Morxelon, President Day replied. The same way peace was maintained when the Vorthak possessed overwhelming conventional power, or when the Crystalline Empire controlled the galactic trade routes, or when any other species held temporary advantages. The strong protect their interests and the wise respect clearly stated boundaries. She gestured to the empty space where the Vorthak delegation's full complement should have been sitting. War Commander Thexvol believed that might made right. He assumed that because his fleet was larger and his weapons more conventional, he could take whatever he wanted. He was wrong. Across the galaxy, hidden listening posts recorded every word of the broadcast. In military academies, strategists frantically revised their textbooks. On research stations, scientists tried to understand how humanity had learned to weaponize fundamental forces that other species barely comprehended. The technology we used is not for sale, President Day said, anticipating the questions that would come. It cannot be reverse engineered from debris because there is no debris. It will not be shared with allies because we have learned that today's allies can become tomorrow's enemies. Sub-Commander Vextar stood shakily in his seat. President Day, the Vorthak Empire requests. We request that our expansion be limited to regions away from your borders. Sub-Commander, President Day replied. That is exactly what we requested 3 months ago. Had your war commander shown the wisdom you display now, his fleet would still exist and his crews would still be alive. The message was clear to everyone in the Great Hall and everyone watching across the galaxy. Humanity would tolerate no threats to their clearly marked territory. The price of testing their resolve was not defeat, it was complete annihilation. Communications specialist Yoon reported quietly to President Day through her earpiece. Madam President, we are receiving formal recognition of our borders from 86 different governments. The Merchants Guild is requesting trade negotiations. The Science Collective wants to discuss research partnerships. President Day nodded slightly, then addressed the council one final time. The borders of Earth are not expanding. We claim no territory beyond what we have already marked. We seek no empire, no conquests, no dominion over other species. We ask only to be left in peace in the space we have claimed as our own." She paused, her next words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "But that space is ours. We have marked it clearly. We have defended it decisively, and we will continue to protect it by any means necessary. Let the fate of the Vorthak's 7th Fleet remind the galaxy that humanity's warnings are promises, not threats." The communication link closed, leaving the Great Hall in stunned silence. Across the galaxy, the message spread faster than any news. In galactic history, humanity, the young species that had been dismissed as primitive and weak, had just demonstrated military capabilities that made their technology appear to be centuries ahead of everyone else. Communications specialist Yoon continued monitoring the galactic networks as the story spread. The footage of the Vorthak fleet's destruction was being analyzed by every military in known space. Scientists were debating the implications of weapons that could manipulate gravity and quantum fields. Diplomats were frantically trying to understand how they had so completely misjudged human capabilities. But the most important message was being received by every military commander in the galaxy. The space around Earth was no longer disputed territory. It was clearly marked, absolutely defended, and completely off-limits. The humans had asked politely for 50 light-years of empty space around their home. Now they had it. The galaxy had learned a simple but vital lesson. When humans give warnings, wise species listen. The price of pride and arrogance was absolute, final, and irreversible. War Commander Thexvol and his mighty fleet had crossed a line that should never be crossed, and they had paid the ultimate price for their mistake. Earth's borders were safe, and the galaxy would never again underestimate the species that had learned to turn the universe itself into a weapon.